All right, hello, folks. Welcome to the Talking Magic channel. Today is January 9th, 2017, and today we're talking the banned and restricted update that just
The
launched today.
surprise.
The
Yeah.
surprise banned and restricted update. I'm your host, Korean, and joining me is my co-host, Trizin,
Yeah, I'm Trizin. He already introduced me, but I felt the need to introduce myself too, because that's what people do, and I'm not a robot.
and we're talking magic. All right, so obviously the big news of today, literally today, was the surprise ban and restricted update that was scheduled originally for next week, but was pushed up to this week. Uh, which was of course surprised everyone, but I think the contents were far more surprising. We have the first standard bannings since Cobblade.
Since Cobblade. And just so people can understand the gravity of the situation, the cards that were banned from Cobblade Standard, which took place, the cards that were banned in question were from the Zendikar block, Stoneforge Mystic, and Jace the Mind Sculptor. Those cards, to this day, are still banned in Modern. Crazy.
So the cards, multiple cards I gotta add. This is three cards that were banned. The cards that were banned today include Emrakul the Promised End, Smuggler's Copter, and Reflector Mage. You know what? Let's go through each one by one, and talk about these cards and like what it really means for them to be out of the format. So of course, let's start with the big mama, Emrakul the Promised End. So, for those who are less familiar with the standard format, Emrakul was a real controversial card in the format. I mean, when she first came out, she kind of came to a lukewarm response. If you remember, people were kind of hesitant about her. I mean, she was pretty. The casting cost was pretty huge for an effect that didn't seem all that worth it, honestly.
A lot of people were disappointed in how much Emrakul had changed as well. Like the Eldrazi,
True,
they no
that
longer
too.
had the Annihilator keyword. They just And Emrakul, she lost the protection from spells and now only has protection from instants. People were kind of hesitant, but I think it's proven itself in standard, from what I can tell, that the ability to reduce her costs off of a delirium like, like a Tarmogoyf like mechanic has proven to been, strong enough.
I mean, turns out being able to efficiently put out a turn 7, turn 6 Emrakul consistently. That's the biggest issue. People, always cited the main issue. It wasn't the one Emrakul that got you. It was the fact that you got Emrakul and then Emrakul and then Emrakul, and that was just backbreaking and irritating and just made people hate playing standard. I mean, okay, I'll be honest. I played a lot of Emrakul myself. So, I personally didn't feel like Emrakul was all that oppressive. I know, sue me. This is gonna be a very unpopular opinion. But I definitely understand where a lot of people were very upset with this card. This card was a house in standard, and a lot of people, I think probably rightfully so, have been calling for its ban. And now it has been officially banned by WotC. I'm personally shocked yet sort of expectant about this. I mean, how this changes the format, though, I mean, it's gonna totally change the format. Because, I mean, Emrakul was played in pretty much all the top tier decks at the moment. Outside of Blue, White, Flash, the top tier decks right now were basically the Aetherworks lists and the Green, Black, Delirium lists. Right now, the Aetherworks list is the deck that is in the limelight at the moment. So this is the one that is utilizing Aetherworks Marvel to cheat out mainly Emrakul incredibly early, the earliest likely turn 4, which is the nuts, and then using that early power to just annihilate your opponent. So
And one
yeah,
one of the things I found interesting about Emrakul and that specific deck is that it's one of your bigger bombs that you can pull out that is still kind of reasonable on its own. Like you can reasonably cast Emrakul if you get enough card types in the graveyard. Play it for 8 or 9 mana. It's a lot closer than that Ulamog is. You would agree with that,
No,
right?
that's entirely true. That's like the one of the biggest draws to playing Emrakul. I mean, I've always kind of felt like Emrakul compared to Ulamog, which I played Aetherworks when I was playing instead. Well, I mean, I still am, I suppose. That I still will be playing Aetherworks, but when Emrakul is still legal in that list, I actually kind of preferred Ulamog off a hit off of Aetherworks compared to Emrakul, because when I hit Ulamog, not only do I exile two of their permanents, I also have a huge threatening body that will exile their top 20, as well as being indestructible. While as Emrakul, she has protection for instance, sure, and she does fly and trample with a bigger body. She is a bit more vulnerable in that sense, and has a potential to be blocked and not really close out the game as quickly as Ulama can. But there is the true power in the sense that I cannot hardcast an Ulamog like I can hardcast an Emrakul. When you build a deck to be able to manipulate that cost reduction, which is not hard at all, by the way, in this standard format, cheating out an early Emrakul from your hand is not that hard to do, and that really was the main power of Emrakul in that deck, was that not only you can cheat it off of Aetherworks, was that you can just play it from your hand pretty easily. So that's definitely a hit for the Aetherworks deck, Aetherworks list. I'm not, if I'm gonna be honest, I'm not too worried about this banning. It sucks. It sucks a lot. Aetherworks list may not be the same again, but I think honestly, just cutting the Emrakuls and adding more Ulamogs, if you weren't running them, adding some stuff like World Breakers, Aetherworks probably will still be able to live as a very powerful, very threatening deck that'll be able to put out those turn 4 threats pretty reliably. As for Green Black Delirium, that's a list that I'm actually expecting pretty insignificant changes to. Emrakul was, of course, their big finisher.
Yeah, you do lose some top end, but I think Green Black Delirium, you win most of your games off of your mid range power. And Emrakul, while a good finisher that, and also a flying threat, which that deck doesn't have too much of, it's not necessary. I don't think it's necessary for the deck.
A lot of some people have been decrying that it is the death of Green Black Delirium. I disagree. I think Green Black Delirium is still in a strong position as a mid-range value show, and with cards Ishkana, with their Lilianas and stuff like that, Mindwreck Demons, it'll be fine. So yeah, I suppose a lot of standard players are jumping in joy with the loss of Emrakul. I'm a little it's a bit bittersweet moment for me, but I understand the need for this card to go.
And while Emrakul was a band on the top end of things, Wizard's next band, Smuggler's Copter, is much more lower to the table, lower to the floor, in the sense that Smuggler's Copter represents the more aggressive side of the meta.
I mean, all-star aggro card, really.
Yeah, it's one of the key cards in Mardu vehicles. It sees a lot of play, red-black aggro, some green-black Delirium decks, Actually, I think for the most part, most Green Black Delirium decks also run for.
I don't think Green Black Delirium. No. From what I know, Green Black Delirium doesn't run
the more aggressive variants.
The more aggressive variants, maybe. I haven't seen those lists that often though. Here's the thing though. I'll be honest. I was surprised by this banning, Smuggler's Copter. Mainly because how quickly it was banned. I mean, it wasn't in standard for a very long time at all. I mean, Aether Revolt isn't even out yet. And we're getting this banned. Announcement, I suppose. But I understand this banning as well. A little bit less than Emrakul, but Smuggler's Copter was almost ubiquitous. You put this in if your deck had a somewhat aggressive lean to this, you put in Smuggler's Copter. I mean, mainly because it was colorless, right? You almost lose nothing by putting this card in. So long as you can crew it reliably, you have a colorless beater that is costing you no color restriction to play. Essentially,
it's kind of unfortunate because like a lot of decks, like the more aggressive variant of Green Black Delirium and the more aggressive Mardu vehicles list, they really do need that loot mechanic. They need to be able to put certain things in the graveyard, whether it's your Scrap Heap Scroungers or just cards that you need to help fuel Delirium, that's a pretty key piece that they're losing.
Yeah, true. I mean, I'm kind of I got two differing opinions on this ban. On one hand, yes, this card was a bit too prevalent in the metagame. It was in almost too many lists. If your deck supported what Smuggler's Copter, what the playstyle that Smuggler's Copter presented, you would jam four of them. It was almost undeniable. Like, is your deck fast? You put in four Smuggler's Copter. That's where you started when you were making lists, basically. But on the other hand, I feel like there were enough answers, and we were starting to get more and more answers to Smuggler's Copter, that I feel like Smuggler's Copter was something that we could have kept around for a bit longer. And who knows what Amonkhet could have brought in, or the next set after that. I think Wizards might have jumped the gun on this one.
I kind of agree. Like with Fatal Push coming in, being able to clear out that that 2 CMC that Smuggler's Copter fits in, and the addition of vehicles that generally eat up Smuggler Copters, like Heart of Kiran, which I don't know if that'll see play or not. If that 4/4 flyer just straight up stops Smuggler's Copter, or
Right.
you have that 3-mana 3/5 vehicle. The name escapes me, but it was originally revealed in Russian, but
Right,
that can
right,
get
right.
lifelink.
Right.
That's also a powerful card against Smuggler's Copters, and also has the crew 1 cost, so it's on a similar level, although being 3 CMC is a lot different than 2 CMC. I do think that those are big roadblocks for Copter to overcome should they see play.
You know,
Should any of those cards see play.
you bring up Heart of Kiran, which I was thinking of earlier too. With Smuggler's Copter out of the picture, Heart of Kiran suddenly seems a lot more powerful. I mean, it's a 2-mana 4/4 with crew 3, yeah, but like if you have a deck with a lot of walkers, which also incidentally become a lot stronger with the banning of Smuggler's Copter. I mean, Smuggler's Copter was a killer for walkers, coming out so early out of the gate. Heart of Kiran might actually just fill the spot of Smuggler's Copter, not for aggro decks, but like for the spot that Smuggler's Copter held for the low cost, efficient flying vehicle that it presented. It doesn't have the loot anymore, but still a powerful flyer in itself. We'll have to see where that goes though, with how Aether Revolt comes and how it changed the meta. But yeah, Smuggler's Copter, it's an interesting ban. I can see where Wizards was going with it, but I'm unsure if it was the right decision. Next
All
up,
right.
I'm more and more. I'm downright against this ban. So Reflector Mage was the last card to be banned. This is uncommon too. So fun fact: first uncommon to be banned in Standard since Skull Clamp. No,
Wow.
it's not a Skull Clamp, but still.
No, it's definitely not on the power level of Skull Clamp. That much is obvious. And the part I'm kind of surprised about is while Reflector Mage is still a strong creature at the moment, especially in those like blue-white tempo lists. Why, if they're going to ban it, why wasn't it back in the days of Collected Company?
Yeah, exactly.
Where Reflector Mage really was so prevalent that it warped the format. I think Reflector Mage is still a strong card, but is this ban truly warranted? Now, some people have noted that Reflector's Mage interactions with some cards coming up in Aether Revolt, the Cat Beast, the 4-mana that can blink a card, name escapes me, that the interaction between those two cards, is pretty strong, but I don't think Wizards should, take the approach, and I don't think they are, of banning things preemptively like that. So we'll see. I don't think that factored into the decision, but yes, I'm also surprised at the Reflector Mage ban.
Well, what it seems to be the decision behind, mainly the main decision behind the Reflector Mage ban, seems to be that they needed to ban something from blue-white vehicles to counteract these bans from the aggro list and from the ban that Emrakul presents from the Aetherworks and the green-black Delirium list. Because as sorry about that. Sam Stoddard had tweeted out that they found out, this is after the bans, they found out that blue-white flash represented 50% or so win rate against pretty much every matchup, and like it was like the strongest deck in the meta. And so if the other cards were banned, but not something from Blue Eye Flash, then Blue Eye Flash would suddenly become like too unbeatable. But to quote Brad Nelson, Reflector Mage over Gideon is just baffling to me. And I wholeheartedly agree with that sentiment. Reflector Mage is an annoying card, but the fact that they pick that over Gideon, which has been mainstay and one of the best cards in Standard since it was introduced, it's just, I can't understand that at all. That's ridiculous.
Yeah, it is a little surprising that Reflector Mage is the card they chose to target. And as F Twitch K pointed out in chat, yeah, Felidar Guardian is the card I was trying to think of. That, why this piece out of everything in Blue White Flash? Why this piece?
I mean, I think banning Gideon it seems to be the most logical decision. Even before thinking of cards like Emrakul or Smuggler or Copter, I mean, Gideon is just oppressive right now in the Standard format, in my honest opinion. You can't get a beater as efficient and as powerful as Gideon these days, especially when Planeswalker interactivity is at such a low in Standard.
One thing Chima Lion had pointed out in chat is that Reflector Mage can feel like a feel-bad card in the sense that newer players may not like the interaction of suddenly they can't play a card that that they had on the field. It goes back to their hand, and that loss of tempo and the restriction of not being able to play at the next turn can cause some feel-bad moments. That's something to take in consideration too.
But I don't think that's I don't think that's something that design or whoever is making the decision at WotC should be considering. Obviously, obviously what I'm saying is going to be hitting a brick wall because most of this is business. They're not going to ban a staple mythic that's selling packs. I mean, obviously they banned Emrakul, but Emrakul was kind of demanding a ban. But by banning Gideon, that's just bad business on WotC's sense.
Especially for Battle for Zendikar, which, let's be honest, there's not a lot of cards out of that set besides Gideon that are really money sellers.
Which is really unfortunate, honestly. I know they're a company in the end, but really it's just hurting the game. Overall, these bans, I'm not sure what to think about this. I mean, I'm gonna quote Reed Duke here because I think he echoes my what I'm thinking pretty perfectly. I mean, he said on Twitter that he doesn't particularly care what cards get banned, but as Reed Duke said, but I'm glad WotC is willing to use this as a tool to keep MTG as fun as possible. And I echo that sympathy somewhat. Yeah, you were going to say?
Just to answer Andrew in the chat, Emrakul, the Promised End, Smuggler's Copter, and Reflector Mage are the 3 cards that are being banned from Standard.
Yes.
There is 2 additional cards that are being banned from Modern that we'll get to in just a moment.
So, I mean, I bring up Reed Duke's quote because, tweet, as you say, because it really echoes what I feel about these bannings. Bans in general don't really, I don't like the idea of banning. I think, I don't know if you feel that way too, but I think banning is kind of lazy. I think rather than banning cards, we should be introducing better answers or maybe better cards to deal with stuff, or maybe Wizards should design in a way that this kind of stuff doesn't happen in the first place. But on the other hand, this does allow them the opportunity to be able to assess the game as it's evolving and as players are taking the game and they're tinkering with it and experimenting with it. And if players find a way to abuse things, or if players realize that development was kind of wrong with how they balanced the card, that way Wizards can step in and say, okay, we made a mistake, or this is not good, and stop it. On that side of the coin, I do agree with the way WotC is deciding to say, okay, yes, this is wrong, we gotta fix it. But banning things, just outright banning things, just always sits wrong with me. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but on the other hand, on the flip side of the coin, it does show that WotC is responding to things like attendance. They are looking at both
Yes.
tournaments and the Friday Night Magic level, and to me that is good because the experience that WotC should be curating, not only being on a metagame level, but also should be as not from the perspective of they have to consider both the perspective of a pro player to the perspective of just the person buying their first starter deck, or I guess I should say planeswalker deck now, and just taking it to Friday Night Magic. They have to consider a wide range of audience, and it's difficult to assess just who the player base of Magic really is, and they can't just appeal to one end or the other. And so they have to go off attendance. That is their main source of data, and if WotC is responding to that in a way they think is positive for the game, and if it shows results, I'm all for it.
Yeah, it is good they're responding. Yeah,
It's good that they're showing response, because some can argue that that in a lot of formats, like especially when Cobblade was dominant, they didn't respond quick enough. There is arguments and instances where WotC just doesn't respond as fast as we need.
Okay, so of course, obviously, these weren't the only bans that happened today. Modern was also affected by some bans as well. I'll let you take care of these as our resident Modern expert.
So Gitaxian Probe and Golgari Grave Troll were the two cards banned from Modern, and one of them had it a long time coming, and the other has not been unbanned for a very long time. Golgari Grave Troll was previously on the banned list. It was unbanned for a short time. Dredge became a big deck and was consequently banned again. Whereas Gitaxian Probe is a card that I've always been rather against, and a lot of players have been against, just for the sense that you get a cantrip for effectively 0 mana, and you just pay 2 life, but that life cost is minimal. For some decks, that's actually even a positive. And it allows you to basically, in a way, get past the 60 card limit in a lot of decks and create essentially a 56 card deck. The decks notable for using Gitaxian Probe are Infect, as well as decks like Suicide, Zoo, as well as Storm. Lists like that like to use that free cantrip, and the all-in, not exactly all-in aggressive decks, but aggressive decks like Infect and Suicide Zoo like Gitaxian Probe for the additional benefit of being able to know when to go more aggressive. For Suicide Zoo, when to throw in that Teamer Battle Rage. For Infect, when to start using their buff spells, because you can look at your opponent's hand and tell what removal they have, if they're bluffing removal or not, and it just makes for bad Magic. And Gitaxian Probe is a card that I'm pretty strongly against.
I mean, Phyrexian Mana is just dangerous, especially when it's the only cost. I mean, we saw with what Mental Misstep happened, what that brought to the format, when that was still legal.
And so, we'll have to see what Gitaxian Probe banning will do. I don't think it'll be the end of decks like Infect or even Suicide Zoo. For Infect, however, it definitely decreases your chances in the mid-range matchup. Just because it's going to be a lot harder to in Infect, you play so few of Infect creatures as it is, that cantrips like Gitaxian Probe help you get to those cards, and also it helps you know when to use your buff spells to avoid removal. Because if your opponent just removes your card after removes your minion after you've spent so much resources into buffing it to go in for the kill, then you're just down a lot in card advantage, and it's hard to get back into the game. So Gitaxian Probe, for me, in my opinion, changes Infect's matchups mostly in the decks it was already bad against, like your green-black X decks like Jund and Abzan. For Suicide Zoo, this card, not only letting you know when to use the Teamer Battle Rage, but it's also worse in the sense that and Suicide Zoo, you want to get your life total real low to make Death Shadow better, and losing this card definitely hurts that as well, I think. Now, as for Golgari Grave Troll really only affects one deck, and that's Dredge. And Wizards has stated in their ban announcement that they banned Golgari Grave Troll and not cards like Prized Amalgam or Cathartic Reunion. You know, the new cards that helped push, help push Dredge over the top. They banned Golgari Grave Troll because, all in all, it's Dredge that is the broken mechanic, and Golgari Grave Troll just has straight up Dredge 6, and that is really powerful. And I agree with that assessment. I don't think Prized Amalgam or Cathartic Reunion or Collective Brutality are the cards you need to ban. I really do think it's, your big dredger like Golgari Grave Troll, and I think Dredge still has the potential to be an all right deck. I don't losing Golgari Grave Troll hurts a lot because once again that Dredge 6 was the biggest dredger in the deck for sure, and it also gave Dredge other alternatives to winning by just slamming down a giant creature. So we'll see what it does to the format, but I think they're both pretty good bans.
Okay, so how much of the meta do you think this will impact? Largely, like I think you mentioned in a discussion we were having earlier, mid range becoming a resurgence or something. I can't exactly remember but there's like a cyclical nature of the meta that you were briefly mentioned before.
Well, yeah, I think I think as like mid range decks, have more potential against decks like Infect or against Suicide Zoo and stuff like that with the loss of Gitaxian Probe. Mid range decks can become more powerful and can help push out those early aggressors, and then decks like Tron and other combo decks whose natural enemies are aggressive decks can start to come in and start pushing out the mid range decks. I don't know how big the effect is going to be, just from these two cards, but it might be the signs of a healthier meta for Modern in the sense that we're going to get a lot more variations in deck styles. We'll see. Overall, I definitely agree with the two cards banned today. I would like to see more unbannings in Modern, though, I think.
I would always like to see more unbannings than bannings.
Yeah.
Me too. Variation. That's a good word to come out. I didn't really think too much of variation. Well, I mean, obviously in Modern, there's a wide card pool to select from, so obviously there's a lot of chance for variation and stuff like that, and this is gonna open up more avenues for variation. But that made me think of what these bannings are gonna do for not these bannings in particular. Let me go back up a slide actually, so we know what cards we're talking about. I didn't really think too much of how the meta game might change the standard in terms of variety of decks. Like, all I was thinking really was, okay, now this deck is worse, this deck is worse, this deck is losing this piece, this deck is losing this piece, etc., etc. But like, I realized with the bannings of cards like these that makes the top tier decks that were quote unquote oppressive being knocked down a few pegs. What does this open up in terms of standard playability?
Well, I would like to go back on like an earlier deal when Reflector Mage first entered the format, is that you had, your star creatures like Hangerback Walker. That's as soon as Reflector Mage came in and Reflector Mage decks started to become more popular, Hangerback Walker, considerably dropped in how many decks used it. And, with cards like Reflector Mage and like Smuggler's Copter going out, in the case of Smuggler's Copter, a lot of Planeswalkers are more playable now. In the case of Reflector Mage, a lot of creatures might be more playable now. We'll have to see. We'll have to see how that, opens up the format. But I do think that, with these all-star cards that can suppress other cards, that, different options might pop up, and that might mean different decks have better odds. That it might not just be the triumvirate of blue, whites, green, black, and Aetherworks.
True.
We may see. We may see just more deviation in general.
Yeah.
So
maybe a triumphant return of control. There hasn't really been a strong control list in standard. I mean, outside of that ridiculous Pro Tour for Kaladesh.
Oh yeah, with Grixis. Yeah.
But in FNMs for the most part, local games and such, control really hasn't been able to show anything. But maybe with the lack of more aggressive cards like Smuggler's Copter fueling the aggressive list, there might be a control list that finally shines through.
Not only that, but like for example, with Reflector Mage out, mid-range suddenly has, less answers to any like big creature control might drop onto the battlefield. And with their planeswalkers being able to see more survivability, that allows, control decks, who really only rely on just a few threats to actually push through. And so we'll see. We'll have to see what it does. And I honestly think Emrakul, is another deck that really hurts control because you have all these cards that are answers, and Emrakul can turn that against your own threats.
Yeah, Emrakul is definitely one of the biggest beaters against control because you suddenly take their entire grip, full of answers, full of impactful spells, and use them to usually disastrous effect against that control player. So that's definitely improves a controls player's life as well.
Yeah. I mean, in the end, this is, as many things, speculation. It's also worth considering that the Revolt brings in, a lot of cards on its own merit, and that maybe some of these bans were too soon. Like, and especially in the case of Smuggler's Copter, where we might be seeing, a lot more answers to Smuggler's Copter in the Revolt. We do not know, but it will definitely be an interesting meta to look at now that these three corner pieces have been taken out, and we have an influx of new cards. I mean, and if Wizards is able to shake up the format and it becomes a lot healthier, then that's a good thing. It's a sign that these bannings can have a positive impact, and that Wizards' involvement, direct involvement, can have a positive impact. From a finance standpoint, I am not too sure. Bannings are always hard on players' wallets, especially once they've fully invested into a deck. And if a banning completely kills that deck, that's really hard for the player.
Yeah, I wasn't.
We'll have to see what that does.
I wasn't sure if I was gonna mention the finance aspects of it, but yeah, dropping $30 on Emrakul to later find out that she has been banned in pretty much the only format that she's relevant in, it does kind of make me a bit salty. Listen, I'm not crazy. Okay, I'm not gonna rant about that whole thing. It's gonna happen. Whatever. Magic finance isn't stable. Don't invest in it. But that is an aspect of it that can be a bit worrisome, and is also one of the biggest grumblings when it comes to modern bannings. Right? People are suddenly like, "Oh, I don't want to play this tier 1 deck because who knows when they'll ban this part of it, and I'll lose hundreds or whatever." Such.
Yeah, Rogues Anonymous. I think you bring up a good point, like to counteract mine, that the sign of bannings overall is a sign that R&D, is failing, which I can both agree with that. I can see where you're coming from, that from a development standpoint, that they were not able to, the future league wasn't able to predict well enough what was going to be so powerful in standard. But I also think that it is better to ban something if you have to use it as a failsafe than to take the policy of we're not going to ban things at all. And while I would like to see less bannings, I think it is good that in this instance Wizards has reacted, so long as the bannings prove to be healthy for the format. So we'll just have to see.
Well, I mean, that brings us to the final part of this banned and restricted update announcement. The big part about this announcement was about how they're changing their schedule for these announcements. They are now going to be announcing changes to the banned and restricted list every Monday after the pre-release of a standard legal set, and the 5 weeks after a Pro Tour, which is also a Monday. So banned and restricted list updates are happening much more frequently than previously.
I believe it's twice as much, right?
Well, I think twice as much. Yeah,
it's we're doubling the BNR announcements.
Yeah. I mean, which brings up that discussion of is Wizards relying on bans because their development is failing, or is it a way for Wizards to really take into consideration of how cards are impacting standard and be what's that word, reactive rather than proactive.
Well, being reactive in the sense can have its dangers. Just like, once again, hate to bring up finance, but people do invest in decks, and they do pay. Like, for example, Smuggler's Copter is not cheap, and no deck plays just 3 of Smuggler Copter, just 2 of. Usually they play the full 4. And suddenly, if that investment, if that was a key like piece of your deck, or like an example of like Mardu vehicles, is, it's a highly important piece or component to that deck. And if you are left without a deck afterwards, that could lead to a player, no longer attending FNMs or feeling that their investments are at risk. So I do believe that ultimately the future league is there for a purpose. We should be taking a more proactive stance approach to these things. But it is nice to know that Wizards can rely, I will not rely, but it is nice to know that Wizards can resort to a reactive approach if need be, if they have
maybe,
to.
yeah, I do kind of like that, but like I've mentioned this earlier with I've already brought this up basically, and I've already talked about it a bit. But like you mentioned the future league and how it serves a purpose, but they've shown time and time again that they don't know what they're doing, or at least they don't test as much, or they don't play as well as people actually playing Magic. I mean, it's expected. They're a much smaller group than the large group of pros or the much larger group of people public that play Magic. And so in essence, they can't test everything, or they can't come to the same conclusions with the same sample size as the public does. But I think there needs to be something that can be done better to prevent stuff like Emrakul, to prevent stuff like Smuggler, Copter, cards that are obviously way too good for what they are, from actually coming into print in the first place. I mean, they just need to test better. I mean, right?
Yeah, we'll have to see how that entails. But, the more resources you put into testing, the more you have to start worrying about, Wizards are already worried about leaks and information spilling out as it is. And the more testers you hire, and that gets to a dangerous point. Plus, that's just like developing a lot more resources. I mean, I agree. I think that if the testing is not working out, they need to devote more resources to testing. However, from a business standpoint, that may not be the easiest thing to do. But who knows? I definitely think that the bannings are a sign that the proactive standpoints in like R&D need reworking, or at least they need more resources.
Yeah, yeah. I'm just also looking into the future. I'm also slightly worried about what this might entail. Maybe Wizards might be a bit too one of these days. Maybe they'll be careful now. Maybe they know what they're doing now. But one of these days, maybe they might be too ban happy. They'll push the button a little bit too soon. Suddenly, this gets banned. This gets banned. That gets banned. What's safe anymore? Is this next that's getting banned? I don't like that environment.
Yeah, and I do agree. I think banning should be very far and few between. And but like the main point I'm trying to get across is that while it is important to be proactive,
right.
it if tournament attendance is showing that this is an unhealthy format, if attendance is dropping, it is a good sign that Wizards can react. However, especially with a format like Standard, the way you need to react with sets coming out quarterly, is that you need to print better answers in the next set. Now that can be dangerous too. That can always be dangerous in the sense that your card that's good now may not be as good then. But
right.
But opening that up is a lot better way than straight up banning.
Well, that is a lot better, because like that's much more natural, and that lets these cards that were designed in the first place and people who want to play with them still let them play with them. It's just that now there's answers to them, instead of it's just like, oh well, now you can't play with them at all. We'll have to see how Wizards handles this in the future. How essentially doubling the number of opportunities for banning and restricting and unbanning and unrestricting too evolves the metagame and evolves how card design. This will affect card design too, I think, as well, because potentially letting Wizards having this power of being able to ban more and having the freedom to ban more, potentially this is a double-edged sword. This is both good and bad. Will let them push the envelope more when it comes to powered sets, because they'll be able to more freely and with less fear push more powerful cards without having situations like Battle for Zendikar, or situations like Theros was a pretty decent set, but some might consider it a bit underpowered. But you know what I mean. Generally
Yeah, I mean,
underpowered sets.
getting more pushed cards like Fatal Push, for example, you know, is important. It is important for standard, and it's important for selling packs. But in the end, like the problem with this being a paper, with Magic being primarily a paper game as opposed to a digital game, is once you print it out, it's very hard to undo that. It's very hard, to go back and retcon anything.
Right.
And
Well, I mean that's
you know,
why
I,
it's a like I said, it's a double-edged sword. While on
mhm.
one hand, um, sorry, I lost my train of thought there. While on one hand, Wizards is allowed to push the envelope more and publish greater, more powerful cards with the safety valve in the sense that they can retcon it, as you say, ban it when they want to. On the other hand, then they might go a little too far
Mhm.
and push that Uber card that that just needs to just get out of there, just out of the
But
format.
like as much as I hate to bring finances back into things, Magic is primarily
It is
a
an
collective
important
card
thing. It
game,
is an important thing to
and
bring up, though.
you don't want to have cards on such high power that they become a must buy for everyone, and then you ban it. What does that do to sales? What does that do to the LGSs, your local game stores that have a bunch of these cards in stock? How does that affect their finance?
That's true, though.
And yeah,
LGSs are the lifeblood of Magic. Honestly, I mean, if they go, where does the game go, right?
and that is something like from a finance standpoint, I think bans, and they do show, obviously a huge impact on the price of cards. Cards, as soon as they're banned in standard, if they don't see it play in other formats, they're going to drop like crazy. There's nowhere else to play these cards, and suddenly stores that have inventories of them, have these cards that no one will buy, and
Yes.
that's the primary reason of why bannings need to be so careful. Is that it's more than just the metagame; it's this entire culture of what Magic is,
Right.
and
This is why.
I agree
Yeah.
with Ninja. I agree that
I was gonna
that
bring up his
you'll get
comment. It was pretty funny.
more players will be in attendance if you give a diverse meta. It is a balance between the two.
Yeah, I was also gonna mention how, as Pork Ninja mentioned, it's great how they announced Fatal Push, which I saw immediately. This enters Smuggler's Copter really well. Smuggler's Copter gets banned. Okay, that's good. That's good to hear. Whatever.
Yeah.
Um,
The Overmaster, I agreed to an extent. Finances, overall, like you should consider the metagame first, but Magic is a game with a financial aspect. It is a collectible card game.
yeah, I'm gonna argue that. Yeah, like you said, it's a collectible card game. Magic is a
In an
hobby.
ideal world, yeah.
In
In an
Yeah,
ideal world, we could have this perfect meta where the game is great, but that perfect meta where the game is great has no point if people aren't able to afford going to tournaments.
yeah. I mean,
That's another thing you have to consider.
in the end, Magic is a hobby, and we pay for our hobbies. We pay for these stuff. We pay for this hobby because we love to play this game. And yeah, in a perfect world, finance shouldn't matter. We should be playing this game for free in a utopia. But then, where do we play when our LGSs are out of business? I mean, sure, you can have a kitchen table session and stuff like that. But sometimes we want to be at the stores. We want to hang out with the community that's been fostered and stuff like that. So finances, while maybe not the most ideal situation, is always very important when it comes to something like Magic.
Well, the Overmaster, it's not just about tournaments. It's also about your Friday Night Magic.
Exactly. Your
Everyone
LGSs.
wants to do well, and if the top decks are always the ones at the finishing tables, and you can't break that price barrier to get there, what does that mean for you as a player? Like, sure, it's just the spirit of enjoying Magic, but a lot of people, for the most part, want to be able to do well, and they want their results, even at a small level, not just tournament level, prove that. And so I think that I really do think that while the meta is something that ideally should be most considered, you do have to consider other aspects like finance.
I mean, just to cap it all off, basically, This is why bannings are so tricky. There's just so many factors to go into this. There's so many fine things that these bans affect. Not only is it gameplay, which is the most direct thing, but people's finances, how this affects design, development, attendance. There's just so many things that Wizards has to be careful of, which is why when something like this happens, when 3 cards in standard and 2 cards in modern as well get banned, we gotta pay careful attention to how this pans out and how things will develop from here coming forth in the future.
I mean, like a act cracker, I do agree. Drafting is another fun way to enjoy the game, but some people enjoy playing constructed, which is a much different environment than draft.
That's what's great about Magic. There's so many ways to enjoy the game. I love draft too, but what's the point of if I'm gonna draft? If I'm drafting, great. I get to draft these cards. I get to play with them. But sometimes I want to play in a much more constructed way. I have a plan that I've already constructed myself. I love the idea of draft. Of I'm constructing it from opened packs, and I'm working with my pod, and I'm forming my deck there. But sometimes you really want that plan that you made yourself with your neat 60 card deck with 4-ofs and stuff like that, and that's the draw for other people. Or maybe you want to play Commander or stuff like that. That's why Magic's great. You got stuff for everyone.
Yeah, at Log Trap, it would be nice to see Team Merge back, especially with that that card with a pseudo. He gets a lot of nice tools in Aether Revolt, like that one card with Pseudo Cascade. I don't know if that'll see play, but cards in a similar vein are going to be sweet.
Listen, I don't want to show my personal bias too much, but goddamn, I hate Elder Deep Fiend.
Yeah, Elder Deep Fiend is the great calamari is pretty silly.
But keep chugging away in chat if you're watching live about what you think, and please, if you're not watching live, you're watching this on YouTube later, post in the comments what you think about these bans and how you feel about Wizards and their decision to go with a much more active banning schedule. Now, before we end our show, I do want to do a quick shout out to the professor at Tolarian Community College. If you don't know him, go check him out. He is my favorite Magic YouTuber, and I love him to bits. But he's recently came into some dire straits. Was recently laid off his job as a professor, and basically he reached out in a very loving video, asking his viewers to just donate $1. And I've provided his Patreon link on the screen. I'll also put it in the YouTube description. And if you can, please help out the professor. If you can't donate anything, that's fine too. Just check him out. Go to his affiliate page at Card Kingdom, who's sponsoring him. So cardkingdom.com/TCC. I'm not entirely sure. Sorry about that. But please, he's an awesome guy. He deserves all the support he can get. And I just wish him the best of luck in the future. All right. So that's pretty much all we have for the show. If you have any closing thoughts?
Not really, other than, that this is interesting to see another standard banning. Whether or not I agree with the bannings, we'll have to see. The modern bannings I definitely agree with. I think the choices were very good there. However, in modern specifically, I'd like to see more of a stance of unbannings as opposed to bannings. But hashtag bring back Splinter Twin. We'll see. We'll see. We have to, like digesting bans and unbans really in the end takes time. And as much as I'd like to pretend like I have some amazing ability of precognition, I do not. We'll have to see how it pans out.
All right. Well, thanks for thanks for joining us on another episode of Talking Magic. Hope to see you again soon.